Thank you, Secretary Geithner, for coming to meet with our committee and talk to us about so many important issues, and thank you for your leadership over these many months of great need. Obviously, we've all heard from our manufacturers, energy and transportation companies about the great need for derivatives for budgeting, hedging risk, hedging cost, managing cash flows. And I can understand that a company, anywhere in America, let's say Pepsi, might need to lock in the cost of a key ingredient or may need to hedge against swings in foreign currency. However, I want to continue the line of questioning that Senator Klobuchar started, which I agree with and I think was an excellent area of focus. Some derivatives are considered by many experts to be more dangerous instruments and would be in need of perhaps different regulation. And credit default swaps in particular, and I intend to hopefully ask Live Master some questions on that, who is the leading world expert on this issue, to talk a little bit more about it. But many people, many investors, many experts have described them as having no social value. And it's my understanding that clearing facilities have had to create an entirely new risk modeling paradigm from, from the ones used on other derivative contracts to properly insulate themselves from the CDS risk. When you look at an instrument that has enormous binary outcome and is often used as a directional or a naked bet against a company, shouldn't this be regulated in a dramatically different fashion? And how do regulators set capital requirements for a book of derivatives that can go up 100% in the money overnight? So I do think you said there was similar, they're more similar than different. I don't truly believe that's the case, but I'd like your thoughts more specifically.
All right, I'm not sure I can do justice to this, but let me try it this way. Derivatives provide the capacity to hedge against all sorts of different risks. Risk of a rise in interest rates, fall in the value of the crops you're producing, rise in the value of oil, something you have to use to produce, the risk of failure of a major counterparty, risk of a collapse in the system. Those risks are very different, they're very diverse. All those are different. The principle has to be that capital and margin requirements are designed in a way that captures those risks. Now, there's a lot of focus on credit derivatives, which is appropriate because that's the market that's grown the fastest. Again, it grew up largely in a more stable world, untested by the kind of collapse we saw here. And it was the scene at the crime. And it was present scene at the crime, attributed a lot of source of damage. But I think the better way to think about the risk in this case is where the losses were most acute, everywhere, were in exposure people took to the real estate market or to risks that were associated with a collapse in housing. Because very, very few people built in any expectation to the risk management system, how they price risks, that actually captured the risk of the fall in housing prices we saw.
Right.
That is a different kind of risk than an FX risk or interest rate risk. But the principle is the risk should be captured to the great extent you can in the margin risk management system capital requirements against those risks. But of course, they're slightly different risks. But if that's the philosophy that underpins the approach across derivatives, we'll have a stronger system.
But do you see a change in how you would regulate the CDS market over other derivatives?
Again, I think the basic principle is standardize things.
Just because they're binary.
Well, again, it means that the risk management challenges, margin capital requirements need to be different because they're slightly different risks. But the principle we're trying to bring across these markets is you want to have shock absorbers designed to capture those risks better. And a simple principle is stuff that is standardized, that can be centrally cleared, should be centrally cleared, because that'll make the system as a whole a little less vulnerable to contagion. Instead of me having to decide what your exposure is, not just my exposure to you, but your exposure to a bunch of other counterparties I have exposure to try to unscramble that egg in a crisis, try to sort through that bowl of spaghetti in a crisis, you can reduce those exposures to a single number of exposure to the clearinghouse. That can bring a lot of benefits to the system in terms of stability if the clearinghouse has got good margin capital requirements behind it.
Well, let me follow that up with a question about the clearinghouses. As we look at bringing large numbers of currently unregulated derivatives into central clearing, how do you decide what will be cleared in a way that does not jeopardize the current clearing system? For example, the member firms that guarantee clearinghouses do so at their own discretion, and to the extent they cannot adequately assess risk, perhaps in some of these kinds of derivatives, do we risk the enormous financial backstop to the clearinghouses?
We do, and that's why, as you said, when you centralize risk like that, you take it from a bilateral market where it's more dispersed, and you centralize in a central counterparty. For that to reduce risk to the system as a whole, you got to make sure that central counterparty has the kind of financial safeguards against default by a major participant that, again, we're strong enough in very bad states of the world. That's central for this working. And if you don't do that, you'll make the system less stable, not more stable. And you're right, doing that for credit derivatives, like all sorts of other derivatives, is a complicated task. But that's not beyond our capacity. But it is not true to say that the world will be safer if we left this all in the bilateral over-the-counter market. We had a test of how well the system withstood that, and it was not a great experience for the system as a whole, because it made the level of uncertainty in a crisis much more acute. It made contagion worse, made it much harder for anybody in the face of the storm to really understand what the risk is, and we think we can improve on that.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.